So I'm a bit of a nerd. Anytime that I get involved in anything, I take an interest in anything, the first thing I do is I research. It doesn't matter if it's a car or an engine or a race or a part, it doesn't make any difference. The first thing I do is research. And what I do is I look to find the origins of the device or the thing or the event, whatever it happens to be, and the events that led to it. Because in order to understand how something works as a mechanic, you have to understand where it came from, what questions were trying to be answered, what was the result that they were trying to attain. And when I took an interest in the Slant Six a few years ago, that's what I did. I read, I researched, I did everything I could. And while everything that I've messed around with to this point has been like 225s, the thing that stuck out in my mind from get-go was how much love the engineers had for the 170 and how much disdain they had for the 225. These are the words of one of the engineers that was involved directly in the project, from the beginning. The beloved Slant Six was designed first as a 170, though they knew all the time it was going to be raised an inch to become the 225. But it was well into the 170 development program before we even saw a 225. Boy, that thing was a disaster. For an engine with the reputation like it has now, that thing was a pig to start with. Everything was wrong with it. Things I can't even remember. The parts were all made for the 170 with the exception of the block, crankshaft, and connecting rods. All of them required modifications, a lot of which found their way into the 170 as well. It just proves that you can't build two engines that much different in displacement with the same identical parts and pieces. It doesn't work out that way. So from the get-go, the engineers, the plan was the 170. And remember, the motor was designed around an engine compartment. Actually, see, you go back to even before then. In 1956, 1957, Chrysler was toying with the idea of an import, and the very first efforts towards this was a four-cylinder motor that the Slant Six was later derived from, and it was actually laid over in a slant, transverse mounted at the back of a car. The project didn't work. They just canned the whole thing. So beginning in 1958, they started developing the Valiant, and because of the space limitations of the Valiant, the low hood line, the short nose, that's why the motor was laid over at 30 degrees, and that's why it's as short as it can be. That's why it has such a small bore spacing. But that's all besides the point. According to the engineers, and I can't find the quote right now, but one of the engineers said that 170 is the perfect engine. Now, after I'm done researching something, I'll go and dissect one, and preferably a broken one. And again, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a fuel pump for a dragster. It could be a rear end for. It doesn't matter what it is. I try to find a broken one, dissect it, and find out what went wrong with it and what. I've never been able to find a broken 170. I've never been able to find a bad 170. They're all pristine. They all run great. There's never any problems with them. 225s, you'll find them with rods sticking out of them. You'll find them locked up. You'll find them in just generally, So that brings us to the Miata, and our work on the car itself. Fabrication work is finished. Now we're turning to the drivetrain, and a lot of you guys were like, there's so many better choices. Put a 318 in there, put a V6 in it, put a this, put a that. It's going to be so much slower than the four-cylinder that was in there. No, I want to toy with a 170 in the environment that the engineers originally intended it to be. Remember, they didn't design this as a drag engine. They didn't design it for acceleration. They designed it as a European-style engine that would be competitive with the touring series cars that they ran in Europe, as opposed to in the United States, it was all circle track and drag racing. The 170 was designed for road racing. That's the performance that they had in mind. And when they ran the NASCAR Compact Series, which only ran for one season, the Slant Six ran away and hid from everything else. And they didn't use the 225. They used the 170 with the Hyperpack setup. Which brings us to our 170. I want to see what one of these engines is capable of, and I think it's capable of a lot more than people have ever given it credit for. To the best of my knowledge, since 1960, Nobody has screwed around with the 170 to any extent. I'm sure class racers through the 60s, you know, modified and comp eliminator, I'm sure that they all played around with the Slant Six in various incarnations, but none of it was ever really notable. I want to see what one of these engines is capable of. They talk about the thing being sitting on the dyno and running for hours on end at 7,000 RPM, no appreciable wear. I want to find this out for myself. I want to see what these things are. So, here's the core motor that we picked up, and until this morning I was completely unaware of its condition, of its running condition. Well, I mean, I knew it wasn't locked up, but I mean, it could have like no compression, it could be knocking, it could be doing whatever. So we set it up to run here, and we ran it for a little while, and it's perfect, like the perfect engine should be. I'm going to start it up for you guys in a second. Now, for anybody, I love it. You young guys who deal with late model cars, you can't do this. We could do this. And for you guys with older cars that you want to bench fire, you want to test fire an engine on the floor, this is the simplest thing in the universe. All you need is a battery, a hot wire, a coil, hooked to your points, and that's it. That's it. We attempted to run this thing off of a fuel pump, and you can see it's got a relatively new fuel pump. I mean, it's a new fuel pump. It's dead, you know, just like you expect all new parts to be these days. It's dead, so we have to run it off the squirt bottle. Lee, is this thing all?
Yes, just hook up the hot wire.
All right. Let me, hang on. Go slow. We gotta fill it with gas. I gotta fill the float bowl with gas. And this is our Super 6 intake. Oh, hey, before we try to start this, come around this side, Cap. Remember I said in the last episode of this that we were going to weld a plate, so look at what we did here. Here's our Super 6 intake, here's the stock original exhaust manifold. We pulled the flapper valve out, that's what this is, that's just welded closed. And you can see that we welded a plate over the top of this and created an air gap that's about, I don't know, just about a ½ an inch air gap. And that'll drastically reduce the inlet temperature, makes a big improvement in the performance of these engines. So, let's all right. Let her rip. Not bad, huh? We don't want to let it run too long because I have no tranny fluid in here, and we don't want to kill the pump before we ever get started. So what we're going to do with this is just clean everything up really good, give it a paint job, stick it in the car. A lot of you guys asked about why no headers, right? Well, there's no room for headers in here. This exhaust manifold puts the pipe exactly where it can just barely fit through and join up with the stock exhaust system. The transmission, there's really nothing to do with this thing. I'm going to pop the valve body off of it, pull the accumulator spring out, throw a fresh gasket and filter in it, and call it a day. Because I hope the transmission is in the same condition as the motor. So there you go. The perfect engine running perfectly. Now I'm really stoked. I can't wait to get this thing in the car and see what it can do. And like I said, this is phase one. This motor is awesome just the way it is. I'm going to grip my hands on another one of these things and I'm going to build it and see what we can get out of this thing. So that's it for now. I'll see you tomorrow.